Good morning. Today, for the first morning session, we're going to talk about integrating medical and behavioral programs in order to save more lives in our sheltering system. So the first part is really focused on laying the foundation for the second part to follow. And in this first session, we're going to talk about what are the shared goals for animal sheltering systems. What is quality of life? How is that defined? How is it assessed? Is it really important? We're going to talk about stress, and then we're going to talk about distress. We're going to introduce the Dogs Playing for Life program, and then we're going to share some shelter stories or stories from shelters that have incorporated the Dogs Playing for Life program.
So this is something that I always bring to the table whenever I'm doing a presentation for animal welfare. It's my wake-up kind of rah-rah thought process in the morning about, okay, what are we actually doing here again? What was the point of being involved in animal sheltering? We want to make sure that we're functioning as a safe haven for lost and surrendered companion animals. We want to provide any and all available resources to maintain them medically and behaviorally and emotionally. We want to save as many lives as possible. I find that to be the hardest part of the job, especially from a behavioral perspective. Making sure that we're doing our best for the animals, but not at the expense of the community, and that we're placing safe animals, but we're doing as well as we can for them. And I think that's always going to be a moving target to some extent, and it's the most challenging part of the behavior piece, I believe. And of course, we want to be good educators so that we're always part of the solutions moving forward, not part of any problems that we currently face, or that we're not participating in anything that keeps us entrenched in where we are and not where we can be for the animals. When I go to different shelters, I have had the privilege of working with shelters, as many of you have been able to bounce around. I know you bounce around all over the place. One thing that is really clear to me, or became very clear to me, especially having been a private trainer and then coming into the context of sheltering, I think as veterinarians, the specialty for shelter medicine, that's going to exemplify how important it is to understand the difference in context for the animals that are in shelters rather than when you're seeing them as private clients. And all of us as shelters, we function a little bit differently and we have different levels of resource. None of us have enough, I believe, but they're all different. So whether we're talking about do we have enough staff and the time that they can spend as we would like them to, do we have enough facility space, how about the monetary limitations, we all face those. Handling and training skill sets specifically, we're going to talk about that. As we get to that top tier of life-saving, we're going to be trying to help some animals that normally would be outside of the box of what would be considered adoptable, but do we have the right skill set to proceed in that direction? Do you have the medical and behavioral resources to attend to some of these animals' needs? Maybe your shelter doesn't, but a shelter up the street does. And then I'm a big believer from this experience of being on the ground at different shelters that there isn't a one-size-fits-all program. In other words, I love our program, obviously. I think it fits in all shelters in some way, shape, or form. But I think every time we go, I really encourage shelters to understand the concept and then apply it within your context. So take the pieces that work for you, and maybe some pieces get held to the side, and that's something that you can shoot for down the road. But at the moment, it's not a specific 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the steps and the how-to. We have to be a little flexible and fluid in our thinking that way. And one thing that I've also realized is I think if there was one position that we could really invest in at all of our shelters, no matter our context and resource, is to really employ a well-qualified full-time volunteer coordinator, because they're the ones that are going to get you that free workforce. And I think sometimes those positions are really undervalued. It's kind of thrown at somebody at the last minute, but that's the position that I think that can make or break your shelter progressing in whatever way you need to save more lives.
So regardless of our shelter model and our resources at hand, whether we're resource rich or resource poor, we all actually have common shared goals for our shelter and the animals within our care. And one goal is we all strive to stay within our capacity for care as defined by the housing capacity as well as the staffing capacity. We all want to shorten the length of stay for each animal under our care, and this is very important to stay within capacity for care. And then ultimately, the prize is to end euthanasia of all healthy and treatable animals sooner rather than later. So we're all striving for this goal. And certainly this can put us at a little bit of odds with length of stay. As we try to save all the healthy and treatable, we may have longer lengths of stay to find the matching home that's perfect for that pet. And this can then have us struggle a little bit with staying within capacity for care. And this is what makes it so important to assure that every pet under our care, waiting for its home, has good quality of life. But what is quality of life? I'm sure every single one of us has a little bit different definition, and we have parts of our definition match with everyone else. But certainly, quality of life encompasses both physical and behavioral health. And it depends on the balance between the two. If you have too much emphasis on behavioral needs, you may put medical health at risk. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you are too worried about keeping all the animals safe and free from any potential exposure to injury or disease, then they will suffer behaviorally and mentally and emotionally. So it needs to be a balance. And that really is going to be the take-home message, the crux of our presentation this morning, achieving that balance to ensure quality of life. And we can assess, define quality of life using the 5 freedoms.
I just want to point out here, for example, in this picture of Faylene, she's having a blast. I think you can see that in her expression. Blasting her with a hose, or she's looking for that hose. She's trying to catch it. And I'm sure you've all experienced dogs that enjoy that. Whereas there's another dog, for example, that would be traumatized. That would be a heavy correction. It would be very punitive to squirt them with a hose. So I think this picture is perfect for me because it was the example of, the animals are going to tell us if we're getting it right for them. If their quality of life is good, it's really their opinion that matters more than our own.
So here are 3 of the 5 freedoms, and these are 3 that may fall in the wheelhouse of the animal care staff, particularly the veterinary care staff, certainly to assure that all the animals have fresh water and food to maintain their health, that they're not uncomfortable because we have neglected their environment and not provided any comforts for them. And also, we want to assure that they don't have any underlying illnesses or injuries that are a source of pain and discomfort that we are neglecting to recognize and treat appropriately.
And sometimes I think that this can be taken for granted, but I can share with you, or you probably have the experience at your own shelters, simple things like allowing the dogs to have blankets in their kennels with them. Many shelters have problems with the drains getting clogged if the dogs chew them. Of course, there's also the concern if the dogs chew the blankets, right? What's going to happen? Those are the kinds of things that can start competing with one another, that of course we would assume a dog would enjoy a soft blanket, but are there risks to that based upon the environment of the animal, and how do you put that together? And then we have the other 2 parts of the 5 freedoms, which I think would fall under the responsibility more of a medical, behavioral or enrichment team, and that would be for animals to be able to express their normal behavior. Boy, does that have a lot to do with everything that I'm going to talk to you about. And letting them have time with their own kind. That to me is like the big ding, 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 ding. Remember, these are dogs or pack animals that we're talking about. So it's amazing how in sheltering we've kind of come so far from remembering that to be a basic truth for them. And also their freedom from fear and distress by ensuring that their conditions and their treatment help them to avoid mental suffering. And I always want to stress that we're so concerned about that, but we also, I think, have become desensitized to just by the fact that they're with us, we're already starting way down here because our environments typically, even if they're the best, most shishi shelters, from the animal's perspective in that enclosure can be emotionally debilitating to them.
So this is a chart that was developed by Gary Petronik that I thought was a very good example of balancing physical and behavioral health, integrating the two, merging them so that the pet is happy. So on the left-hand portion of this table are some definitions of quality of life. High quality of life, good quality, borderline, poor, and a life not worth living. On the top of the table are the 5 freedoms, all ending up with happiness, where all mental and physical needs and wants are satisfied. So we have a quality of life scale on the left and a happiness scale on the right-hand side. And we can interpret the dog's quality of life and happiness using the language that's shown on the far right. So obviously, high quality of life, all 5 freedoms are met. The pets are always happy, very competent, excellent, perfect caregiving. But we also have good quality of life, where there may not be every discomfort met, or there may not be every opportunity to express some sort of normal behavior or socialization need. But most of the time, those needs are met, those 2 freedoms. The dog is happy most of the time, and they still have very competent caregiving, good quality of life, and a nurturing environment. And this is where we need to stay. We do not need to be going below the high quality scale and the good quality scale with regard to happiness and a nurturing environment. Below that, where many of the 5 freedoms are compromised by our care, by our neglect, not by the animal's choice, then they have poorer quality of life. They are not happy at all. It's borderline caregiving, and even at the bottom, you can get to a life really that's not worth living, probably from the animal's perspective, but we're also anthropomorphizing a little bit. And this is actually where people like the ASPCA and HSUS and animal control officers start thinking about prosecuting for animal cruelty when the quality of life is so poor. So we as professional caregivers, veterinarians, behavior experts, need to be sure that we have resources, either within our own shelter or resources we can borrow from the community to nurture the 5 freedoms for every animal and give them good quality of life and strive for the highest quality. So we actually have some industry standards now for animal sheltering, as everyone is probably well aware, since we're going into the 4th year now, that the ASV, Association of Shelter Veterinarians, guidelines for standards of care in animal shelters have been available to guide us in our choices for care of animals in our shelter. And these are some quotes from the guidelines that I thought was very important to bring out for this presentation. Good health and well-being depend on meeting both the physical needs and mental behavioral needs of animals. Behavioral health should be given the same significance as other components of animal care and should not be considered optional, no matter what your resource level is. There are resources available to ensure that this portion of overall health is addressed. And finally, proper behavioral health care is essential to reduce stress and suffering.
That all works for me really well. All of that written down in those guidelines helps me when I go on the ground to shelters, and there's sometimes some resistance to moving forward with the behavior programs. Now, this is something that comes up all the time to me specifically with regards to reducing stress. I know medically it's incredibly important as well. By definition, stress is the response of an organism to a demand placed upon it to change or adapt. Or stress, a physical, chemical, or emotional factor that causes bodily tension and may be a factor in disease causation. So my favorite example that I tell shelter personnel is we're about to get started implementing play groups, especially if they're hesitant, is that if I decided that I wanted to lose some weight right now, I would want to start exercising more. And if I took a walk around the block, for my system at the moment, that probably isn't going to help me to lose weight. I'm not going to adapt. My body's not going to change. My system won't be stressed enough to start losing weight, right? So stress by itself, while we have to pay attention to that, stress is part of learning and adaptation. So by myself, I'm always looking at it, but it's not stress by itself that I'm trying to avoid at all costs. It's when that tips over into a level of distress, which is a pain or suffering affecting the body, a bodily part, or the mind. When any living thing gets into a state of distress, now we're talking about survival mode, fight or flight thinking, that lizard brain thinking. And this is where adaptation is not going to occur. There's not going to be the same kind of processing. So I think that we really need to concentrate on this differentiation, or is that the right word, differentiation, or distinction between stress and distress. Stress, when they walk through our doors and they're in our care and they're living with us, we have to face the fact that they are stressed. Cynda and I are stressed up here, standing and speaking in front of the both of you, but it's good for us. We're going to get some benefit out of it from learning, and hopefully you will too. But neither one of us is having stomach aches and vomiting, right? So we're not in a state of distress. And these pictures, by the way, I want to tell you is that the photographs, I've tried to be, I missed on this one. See, that's terrible. Tried to make sure everybody had credits. The photographs of these animals, these are all positive photographs. Sometimes they're caught so dynamically, like this one. But none of these are animals in distress. These are all photographs of animals in total glee. Oh, we've got a video here. So for an example, there's no sound on this one, just so that you guys don't panic for me. This dog, I think if we all looked at her, but you need to look at her very, very closely. Oh, I do have sound.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to turn it off because I don't think you need to hear it. If we look at her, if you can't, I wish you could see her butt there. She's in total conflict because her face is saying one thing, but the rest of her body belies that she's in conflict. This doofy dog that we're introducing to her, when we brought her out originally, this is at Best Friends LA, she looked super concerned, so we didn't want to overwhelm her in a large group of dogs. But this dog, I called him Frog Face, was so super friendly with everyone, he demonstrated that he could get any dog to play. Now, what I'm proposing to you here is that she looks stressed in this. I'm not denying that. But what I am proposing is that if we allow her to be in this safe situation with a super playful dog, the stress that she is experiencing will help her to adapt and for her system to normalize and for her to become happy about other dogs and playing, which will ultimately reduce her stress. But again, she's not urinating, scrambling to try to climb over the fence, banging herself against the walls, those signs that we see that she's not processing and this is too much, her threshold is blown, and this is a horrible experience. So the behavioral effects of stress, again, that is just a happy dog running that looks like the behavioral effects, if we shelter them too long, that they will turn into the Incredible Hulk and have transformations in front of us. So these stress behaviors, auto-grooming, vocalization, intense vocalization. There's some breeds or types of dogs, you have when they have that kind of howling, wailing, crying in the shelter. Oh, that breaks my heart. Impaired social skills in general, not being well adapted to visiting with people or other animals. The kennel craze thing, that's our layman's term. Increased displays of aggression, both defensive and offensive. We always separate aggressive acts as either what we believe to be defensive or offensive in nature. And then repetitive displays of behaviors like circling, jumping, an OCD type component to these behaviors. And then the learned helplessness, which is that catatonic state with a lack of normal responses. These are all the things that we can see if these animals are just stressed too far. And when we're talking about stress or distress and quality of life, this is a key component to this. Both of them start to diminish quality of life, especially if that stress is sustained and there's no relief from it. Especially then if it tips into a state of distress, or they do. And as the guidelines say, unrelieved stress or distress is unacceptable and must be alleviated. That's our responsibility. And the two of us have decided we recognize that we always want to work on reducing stress, but we accept that it's part of them being with us, and sometimes it's going to be a part of them progressing, but we absolutely strive to eliminate distress. So for example, in this picture, that dog was playing and just rolled happily. He was not about to break his neck in that picture. Yes, we've got a video for you. So this is at actually it has sound, but I have it muted, so you're safe. Rochester Animal Services. This is just an example of their play groups when we did a Playing for Life seminar, and it's just doofy, happy dogs. And so it just stands to reason that if you're seeing dogs bouncing around like this, whatever stress they were going through in the kennels or by being sheltered or whatever life-threatening situation they're in behaviorally right now, no matter what, right here they've got a better quality of life. It's kind of indisputable, right, for this group of dogs. So the Dogs Playing for Life program, I'm going to get into just explaining to you, this is not going to be the nitty-gritty how-to and what I teach when I go to shelters on the ground about how we actually implement play groups, but hopefully we're going to give you a really strong concept of why we do what we do and what it's all about. So our overall philosophy is that before we can expect a sheltered animal to cope and thrive, we need to satisfy them at some level. Pretty redundant to everything that we've been talking about so far. I want us to think about embracing sheltering is like summer camp. The animals come into our care, they meet new friends, they have some new counselors, they do some arts and crafts, they learn some new activities, and then they get to go home, right? Our goal is really not to get them settled in and bonded and locked into being in the shelter as if this is their home. So that's kind of the attitude that I want to have about sheltering in general. This is just a perfect example. I don't know how many of you have seen this. Obviously, these are not dogs, but they are awfully cute. And I think it's the same exact principle, of zookeepers trying to work with their all these different species and thinking specific to their species, what is going to make the animals in my care happy while they're in a cage, bottom line. And even in zoos, I don't care how much money is put into those environments. Those animals explore those environments within how long? And it's still the same environment. And it's still going to be lacking in a certain amount of mental and emotional enrichment. So playgroups themselves can provide enrichment. That's number one. Much more comprehensive assessment for the animals in your care. A training opportunity. There's just like that little scared dog. We're going to actually be working on, or that would be more behavior modification because we're not teaching her something specifically. But from a training perspective, we start working on the dog's manners when they're coming in and out of the enclosure. Like, in other words, if you love playgroup, I'm not going to let you jump up and down and scream your head off and then reward you by letting you in. I'm going to ask you to have 4 feet on the floor and be calm, and then you get to come in. So we have training opportunities while we're out there. And then behavior modification, like the little dog that you saw. If we keep exposing her to the other dogs in play, then hopefully she doesn't look so concerned, and she becomes a more well-rounded, balanced, normal dog. And in my experience from a behavioral perspective, if people want to learn from me about the advanced behavior program that we do, I don't even talk to you about how to deal with unleash reactivity or anything that you think is critical, which it is, until you're doing play groups first. That is the part that gives you the best bang for your buck. I would say, this is anecdotal, probably 80% of the problems you think you have for the dogs in your care behaviorally, if they enjoy play groups, it's gonna handle about 80% of those dogs will be smooth. You won't have to do any advanced training or anything specific for them. It's gonna take care of it for you. Okay, so very specifically, did you want to make a point about it here?
Well, Aimee's going to discuss many of the benefits provided by play groups when we think about balancing behavioral and physical needs as well as quality of life. But one benefit that is not really brought out on our slides, but I want to be sure to mention because it's one not often thought of except from the kennel staff's viewpoint that I want to represent. Most shelters have some sort of time in the mornings where play groups can be most beneficial, and that is during sanitation, especially those shelters that have single-sided runs to house their dogs. They don't have the luxury of having the double-sided runs with the dividing guillotine door to move dogs back and forth to keep them away from the sanitizing chemicals.
Or many times they have them, but they have the doors down and they have a dog on either side because they're trying to save lives and use all their space.
And that is a very common scenario that we see when we visit shelters. So play groups actually are, I think, from my point of view, they are most beneficial to the kennel staff in the mornings when they are tasked with sanitation, which usually takes the first 3 hours of the day, and it is so, they have such better quality of life themselves and is so relieved of stress if the dogs are not in the runs. And they can achieve their task in a much quicker time. So wouldn't it be great to address all the concerns and issues if the dogs are out in the yards playing and having their needs met while the staff are free to sanitize more efficiently and more effective? And this is something I think about every time I walk into a shelter that has not yet implemented the Dogs Playing for Life program in some fashion, is the stress the staff are under to have sanitation completed before the shelter opens, and the stress that's inferred from them onto the dogs.
Yeah, we do have a great example of that. It is one of the bullet points, so remember what she just said when we get there. Basically, this sounds kind of silly, but I think dogs are better at being dogs than we are at telling them how to be dogs. It's kind of a naturalistic approach, I guess. But for dog-to-dog issues, socially healthy dogs can be much more effective trainers than humans. And in some circumstances, like at our shelters, we're able to provide a very unique service to our community. In other words, professional trainers and people from the community that have issues with their dogs, with other dogs, bring those dogs to us. Trainers refer dogs to us because we have this large population of shelter dogs that are very well socialized. We don't want those folks bringing their dogs to the dog park. So, for example, in this video, to find out, in other words, we don't want people in the public to just go to dog parks to work through their dog-to-dog problems. So when you have this program in your shelter, you actually can provide a very unique service to your community. The important thing for Poppy is that we don't have her with a dog she's gonna have a bad experience with, because the Corgi is the owned dog. She needs to kind of learn that it's not as scary as you think. Did she had any bad experiences since she was with you?
No, I just moved from the farm to the city. The noises around scared of the garbage truck.
I see.
For granted.
Yeah.
Now she's not used to that.
Hurting dog. Poppy's trying to show her how to play. Now, and the reason I'm not interfering or saying anything is because they're doing fine with each other. She's trying to work out how to communicate. And Poppy's not being mean to her at all. So the best thing when you're doing dog-to-dog stuff, you really want it to be about dog-to-dog. So for me, as a handler, if I get in there and I'm kind of micromanaging them, they're not going to learn how to respond to one another the same way. Yeah. Poppy, enough. Poppy, enough. Enough. Good girl.
I'm actually going to take your leash off you.
Okay, so this is a little bit reminiscent of the other little dog, right? Now, is this Corgi stressed in this session? I would say that I would consider her behaviorally a little bit stressed. But again, I'm not concerned I'm going to end the session at that point because I identify it as stress and not distress. Right? Again, she's not panicking, trying to bang her way out of the room. We know what those signs look like. And Poppy is just being playful. So my sense is that if I allow her to go through some of the stress and this, and I have faith in Poppy, right, that will help her to adapt to change. We were able to tell her mother, you do not have a dangerously dog-aggressive dog. She would walk this little dog at midnight because her dog acted like a Tasmanian devil on a leash. So Poppy earned the shelter $75 for doing a dog aggression assessment for this client. We were able to assuage her fears about her dog's behavior. We plugged her into a handling class so that she didn't make things much worse on her poor little dog when she got concerned on leash around dogs. And we suggested don't take her to the dog park because if a dog is mean to her or is overwhelming and not as responsive as Poppy is, that's going to be a negative experience for her, but you can bring her to our shelter and we'll make sure we match her with the right dogs to play and help her get past that.
Did she adopt Poppy?
And I wish she'd adopt Poppy, but somebody did end up adopting Poppy as a result of one of those sessions. So the mental and physical outlet from being able to go out into playgroups can create higher receptivity to training. So if you are in a shelter that does have a behavior program or an enrichment program and your goal is to actually get some training done while the dogs are in your care, this is how it started for me. I went to my private client's house and she said to me, she did a bait and switch on me one day and said, guess what? Well, today we're going to go down to the shelter and work the dogs there instead of you working my dogs, and which I loved. And we did that. And then she kept saying, when I had free hours, would you go down and work with the shelter dogs? So maybe I had 2 to 3 hours, but I had 20 dogs in the shelter at that time. it was normal and natural for me. Let me just let them all out in the yard and play together, get their yah-yahs out first, because then when I go to do the basic obedience, I'm not dealing with that high level of frustration. They're satisfied. Those sessions will take better for them. It'll be more efficient for me in getting to the other stuff. That was how this all started, so that I could work more dogs more efficiently. So this is an example of our team at the Southampton Animal Shelter in New York. And all of these dogs, except for one dog, first of all, the people, we have a couple of our staff, a couple of volunteers, and a couple of interns in this group. And all but one of the dogs there, they were all on-leash reactive, extremely on-leash reactive. And one of the dogs, this was the first training session, the one coming right in the front of the frame with the gentleman there, that's Tom from Animal Farm Foundation. That dog came in a catatonic state. You know, she was in her kennel, terrified. And this was her first time in a group session doing any kind of obedience, and Tom was a new handler for her. So the reason that I demonstrate this is that this is an example of dogs playing. The fish on the ground, by the way, is just supposed to be a weird distraction for the dogs to work around and wanting to investigate it. This is very basic training. There's nothing advanced or fancy about this, but it does feel challenging to get this number of shelter dogs in this situation, not with owners that they have a relationship with, to look that kind of happy and good. I would say most shelters find that a little bit challenging. All I want to propose to you is that this becomes so easy when you let them play first. It doesn't become challenging at all. Here's an example of an intern of ours that came in. This is Kate from Baltimore Humane. And after she watched our first play group that morning, we just had her go get a dog out of the kennel because we wanted her to feel what it was like to have a dog that knew something.
Kate is here from Baltimore Humane. She's working Nina. And she's just did the kennel routine nicely. Very nice. So Nina shows you she understands getting to the door means that I'm going to sit. You should be able to open that door. She should be able to do this for you, but you'll deal with it if she makes a mistake. Nice. Good. Nice.
Stands to reason being able to get that basic training done while the animals are in our care is awesome for adoption, right? You'd think it much easier to adopt the dogs out and they're just well prepared, good mental stimulation. That becomes really challenging. I'm sure many of you are feeling like, yeah, that's not going to happen in my shelter. But it can. It can happen at your shelter, and volunteers can get that done for you, and it becomes very simple when you let the dogs play first. What may be considered inappropriate play with a person can be natural between dogs. It's no different than us allowing our kids to go out to recess at school, right? So that they can bounce around, bonk each other on the head, grab each other while they're going down the slide. That's not appropriate in class or in other situations, but it's appropriate for them to play at this time. I'd rather the dogs are allowed to drag each other around by body parts when they're out in play groups with me. They're not allowed to grab equipment because that could be, and I don't want them grabbing people, but they're allowed to do that with each other because guess what? They're practicing bite inhibition when they do that, okay, for example. More benefits. Enhanced quality of life. That's like the basic premise of our whole presentation. Here's a great example. This was at our seminar at Baltimore Humane Society. You can see Kate's in there. This was after her internship. So we're introducing the dogs for the first time.
Okay, who is this?
This is Sequoia.
Sequoia is coming in. And do we have any history on Sequoia? Okay, so she's reactive in the kennel, right? Look at Stewie, like, oh my God. Slow down.
Wow.
Oh!
She's like Shayla, but on speed.
Did you see that? Oh my God, that was hysterical. Oh my God, it's all playful.
Right
no, this is a dog that it is a disservice for her not to have play groups, you know? Like, this play groups are going to change this dog's life here.
But she's rough and rowdy.
Most of the dogs at this shelter reportedly, they were having high incidence of unleashed reactivity, injury to handlers, redirection due to reactivity because the dog's having such a hard time in that situation. And so time and time again, they would come out and just behave like Sequoia. And it seems just so obvious that her quality of life out here in this yard is going to completely change compared to the experience that she's been having. You can understand why a dog like that, being taken out of a kennel, being walked on a 6-foot leash, sadly, oftentimes, the person's wrapped it around their wrist and shortened it to about 3 feet. And that's her experience outside of the kennel with, her tugging on them tugging on her. This is a whole different ballgame when they get to come out and do this instead. And being in a group can create the most natural environment. Again, these are pack animals. It's interesting, I don't want to create a pack while they're sheltered. Remember, this is summer camp. I want them just to meet new friends. I want them to have a very social experience but I don't want to create, these mini packs on one competitive territory. That is a contextual difference between shelter play groups that I talk about when we get into the nitty-gritty. But dogs as a species are meant to be living in groups. That's all that I'm basing this upon. And so if you put them in a more natural environment, their potential for overcoming some fear, anxiety, and aggression becomes much better. Now, this is one of those silly videos that you just have to plug in somewhere.
She does not like greetings.
Like, okay, I want to say hi, but not on my butt. They're like, but you're a dog. Let me sniff your butt. Nope. Okay. Are they not there now? Okay. It's just not the butt. Ooh, nope. So I can't say that she's particularly anxious or fearful or aggressive, but it was such a funny video. You got to put it somewhere, right? But front door, back door greetings, very normal for dogs. She wasn't quite happy about the back door greetings, and all we wanted to do was put her in a situation so that that natural environment with dogs that want to greet her back door and have her learn about that and become comfortable with it. And finally, determining sociability more accurately. Boy, oh boy, do I hope that there is a study done very soon with somebody with a bunch of letters after their names that will get this done. Assessments on leash or behind a barrier are not accurate predictors of a dog's ability or inability to be social with other dogs. Boy, I would like that knocked out of the park once and for all. I can say it all I want, but I need people with letters and journals and stuff to get plugged in there to say that that's not the most, thank you, that is not the accurate way if that's what you're trying to assess. If you were trying to assess a dog's ability to be social with a dog when they meet them on leash, which is a very important behavior for our adopters, it's very important, I'm not denying that, but those tests do not accurately predict whether a dog can or cannot be social with other animals when they're not on leash. For example,
you smile, I want you smile, I love you smile, I love you smile. Why don't you smile? We've been thinking about some positive changes. We need some positive changes. Thinking about some positive. Let us think we are.
this video was made by Rue Yori.
My theory is that when we try to manage a leash and when we try to do all that stuff, I feel like 9 out of 10 times, even if you're an exquisite handler, you're running interference on the dogs communicating the way they need to communicate to actually get through a situation. And if you guys notice, I don't feel like this urgent need to be watching them like a hawk or hovering, because I feel like if we have a problem, he's muzzled. That's the beauty of muzzles. I don't have to. I've got probably a little bit of room for error, and I can get there. It's 2 strides, right? I have my tools from over here I can communicate with. I just don't have that sense of the dogs are kind of telling me I don't have to worry right now, right?
Yep. Constantly. Yeah.
Hi, Happy.
What's the big deal?
I know. What the heck? This could have been a super friendly dog, but somebody else beat up on him. There should be no judgment about him other than how he behaves, not based on, what he looks like.
There should be no judgment for how high he hikes his legs. Or things about that.
I'm happy too.
The news, the radio, and the TV all try to tell us who we should be. But the bravest thing we can do is to love ourselves through and through. There's something happening here.
You happy?
Can you feel it? Can you see it?
I'm happy too.
We've got to make love appeal.
You happy?
Do you know it? Can you show it?
I'm happy too.
There's something. Are you happy?
You happy?
Are you happy? Yeah. Can you feel it? Are you happy? Can you see it?
I'm happy too.
So much joy in the world for every boy.
You happy?
Girl. Do you know it? Do you know it? Can you show it?
I'm happy.
Ooh, yeah, yeah,
well as the Pit Bull Foundation. They made that video for us, which was awesome. Okay, here was back to Dr. Crawford's point, that a more efficient resource, a 30-minute romp can be equivalent to a 2-hour walk. In other words, if you let the dogs bounce around as opposed to me hand-holding a leash and trying to walk them up and down, it would take me a lot longer to do it that way to get them to that point of being happy and satisfied than just letting them roll around with the other dogs. And the mental and physical energy is burned through that intensive social interaction. There's a lot of other things that get covered. Dr. Weiss actually recently wrote something about being cautious about not just physically conditioning dogs. Like just burning that physical energy, that's what happens. You know, they're just going to need a longer walk and a longer walk and a longer walk. We want to add some kind of mental component to satisfying them as well. So either some training. The only thing that I don't want is I didn't love the idea of volunteers being told they can only walk the dogs for 15 minutes. That was a little concerning, but I love the idea of let them go out in play groups and then do a short 15-minute so that you can get to more dogs, have the volunteers work certain dogs for a shorter amount of time, but get a little bit of basic training done in there. Then you get some of that mental piece as well after they've gotten to play. Natural environment for pack animals, we talked about that. Pack-like bonding versus social isolation can minimize behavioral deterioration. And there's a component of this in colony cat housing, right? That's the big driver for allowing cats to live together as well, while you're taking disease management into consideration and each animal's individual behavioral needs. Rapid behavior modification can be accomplished. And remember I talked about not creating mini packs. This one is important, and this is one of Dr. Crawford's favorites. Rapid behavior modification. This little dog here, we named him Swiffer because he was one of the catatonic dogs. He had no defensive reactions, no defensive aggression. In other words, he was clearly terrified, in a state of distress, but this is how it was shown, that he would do nothing. He wouldn't try to bite you. So the point of this part of the video is just to demonstrate that he is completely shut down, obviously will not take food, and my presence is very concerning to him. Typically in shelters, when you have a dog like this, the protocols would be sitting in the kennel and reading with them. Individuals would come in on their non-scheduled days or their non-scheduled volunteer shifts because Swiffer needs them, and they would work really hard to create a bond, which I think is one of the most heartfelt mistakes that we make, because then this isn't summer camp for Swiffer. He's not learning anything other than, okay, you're safe. What we want to teach dogs like this, first of all, we want to see there's nothing I have to offer him that's positive or that helps to reduce his fear at the moment. I'm actually just adding to it. So for me, I want to see, are dogs a natural positive for you? Is that going to make a difference for you? So I didn't keep it in the film here, but I ended up just picking him up and carrying him out, because I had to get him past all the dogs in the kennel. And he urinated and defecated when I did that. He was so scared. My goal is let's just get you out to the play yard and see if the dogs are going to make a difference for you. So typically people would come in again with him. This is actually cute.
Did he just steal?
You were just shoplifted. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty nice and handy.
Is it good? Smart dog.
It's very convenient.
After that initial attempt for him petting Swiffer, which I think was terrifying for him, not necessarily positive, you won't see, you won't see me actually working hard to befriend him anymore. My goal is not for Swiffer to become comfortable with me or to create a bond with me. I'm going to have to break that bond on him unless I want to adopt him. I'm just going to break that bond on him anyway, so why would I do that to him? My goal is for Swiffer to learn that people aren't scary and that his time in the shelter isn't so scary.
You had to get someone from the ground up to motivate her.
Somebody lower than him.
And we're hopeful that the dogs are going to be going to be able to help Swiffer see things differently, much more quickly, much more effectively, and much more efficiently than we ever could.
And I think Swiffer's presentation is very common in shelters. I'm sure everyone of you out there has seen a Swiffer in your shelter on a frequent basis. Certainly not a presentation in the kennel that invites adopters. So high risk for euthanasia.
Right, and some shelters, these dogs are safe because he shows
this is
no...
the end of the healer's first social session. Lasted about an hour or a little bit more, and she wouldn't walk on the leash, had to be carried, had to be dragged out to the play yard, and now as you can see she's walking just fine. This is day 2 for the
What was I about to say about Swiffer?
So today, 24 hours later, Swiffer's actually at the front of the kennel and not cowered in the furthest corner.
Again, watch, you won't see me working hard to interact with him anymore because clearly, after his first hour, he looked like a normal dog with me, didn't he? Almost looked like he had a nice head-up heel going on. Why do you guys think I had the other dog with me on leash? Confidence, right? Hoping that he would model that dog was comfortable walking on leash, he could be comfortable walking on leash. He'd already demonstrated for us that dogs are more comfortable for him than people. So if I turned around to try to pet Swiffer, he'd hit the deck. He'd still be scared of me. But he seems very compelled by me. And what I'm trying to propose here is it's not because I have created a relationship with him that has happened inadvertently. I'm relevant to him because the other dogs seem to be responding to me as if I'm relevant. So again, that naturalistic point of view is if you put animals into a more natural environment, the abnormal behavior or the weak behavior can have a tendency to be brought up to normal. What is the better way to say that? With better language than what I just did. You know that there's probably a term for it that I should know. But think about if Swiffer was the outlier, right, and this was a pack of dogs, and he was behaving on this, he's going to get picked off, right? Natural selection makes him vulnerable if he's hanging out on the outside. He's got to come up to normal and be part of the group to be able to survive. So that's kind of what I'm looking for those components to kick in. Now, the goal, of course, is to make sure Swiffer is with super social dogs, nobody that's going to be mean to him, so that he can learn and build his confidence. And this is a new handler. So once after that first day, Swiffer was willing to walk with me that well, I stopped handling him. Again, biggest mistake is that people will continue to come back because Swiffer needs them. My goal is for Swiffer not to need me. I want him to see that people walk you out to the play group, not, oh, Aimee shows up at my kennel in the morning and takes me out. So these are all new handlers. And so within, what do you think is the common time frame to turn around a dog like this and have them on the adoption floor showing social behaviors? What do you think is common? 6 days? Okay, well then this isn't so quick then, if that's your experience with that. Most shelters are telling me it's 2 to 3 to 4 weeks to get an animal like this willing to be social with multiple people. Not one person, but multiple people. And he was on our adoption floor within 5 days.
If the shelter allows them to survive for that 2 to 4 week period.
So on-leash reactivity and barrier reactivity, those are really problematic behaviors for us to contend with in the shelter. Sometimes can make people unsafe. Certainly makes dogs look less appealing and less adoptable, and are challenging for adopters once they go home. So again, those are life-threatening behaviors, especially if the displays are extreme. So our notion is that healthy contact can reduce the perception of threat, because I assume that most of that behavior is actually extreme defense rather than offense. So you've already seen an example of that with Oscar, so we're going to skip that video because I feel like we're getting tight on time. And finally, I keep saying finally, but these are more benefits, and more benefits. Better roommate matches. More and more in sheltering, we're letting animals co-house together. Typically, it's because shelters need to make space. So if that's what's triggering it, at our shelters, we pair dogs up for quality of life. If we recognize these 2 dogs will probably be happier if they have a roommate, and they can do that well, they can cohabitate well together, we make that choice for their quality of life behaviorally. But a lot of shelters won't do that unless they need to make space, because they'd rather make space that way than through euthanasia. Either way, when your dogs are out in playgroup, let's say at our shelter, we had a big list of the layout every morning, and the dogs would be brought out while the kennels were being cleaned. Our dogs needed to be removed from the kennels to be cleaned, and so now they're out playing instead of being shifted around or tethered to the wall or crated while that's happening. So they're out playing, and then we noticed these 2 dogs seem to be choosing each other as best friends. We know we needed to make space that day, so we would just let the volunteer bring Fluffy back in with Fido, and they would go back into that kennel, and we were done with playgroup. We'd move the paperwork, we'd set them up on the computer, and that's how we did the switch. The kennel was sanitized in the meantime, and they chose each other in playgroup. Very efficient and much better for them to pick their roommate. And then better adoption matches. Obviously, if you have a client that comes in and wants a very public social life with their dog, you're going to steer them towards the dogs that have demonstrated they're playgroup rock stars. Much easier. Talk about liability and risk. When we force our adopters to do a dog meet, they have a dog at home, they want to adopt one of ours, and we know nothing about our dog's ability to be social with other dogs, and the first time we're going to find out is with our client's dog. To me, that is nerve-wracking, and now that we do playgroups every day, it's not the same level of, risk to the client's dog. So much better. None of this is a guarantee, though, that dogs won't end up with personality conflicts, territorial issues, or resource guarding that could surface in the home or later on. We have dogs that do beautifully in playgroup, but they won't kennel together because they don't want to share resources. So they're not a candidate to kennel together, but they love being in playgroup. Finally, this was Dr. Crawford's point. Okay, so two people, in other words, when we showed up at Longmont Humane Society to implement this program in its entirety, it was myself and Pam. That was with my friend Pam with Swiffer. We showed up and told the staff, you don't have to worry about getting the dogs out anymore. They were required in their job description, the kennel attendants had to get the dogs out twice a day. If volunteers came, lighter load for them. If they didn't, they were required to do it. We said, you're off the hook, we're going to handle it. So we rotated about 80 dogs in 2 to 2.5 hours every day, twice a day, by ourselves. We did playgroups first, and then we hand-walked the ones that weren't playgroup candidates, either for medical or behavioral reasons. That was pretty efficient, and boy, did the kennel staff love us at that point. And this is a phenomenal example.
This animal care and control. And we came in at 7 o'clock this morning to work with these volunteers to demonstrate that with a little bit of help, we can get every single dog out of dog adopts at one time, which makes it much easier for them to clean because they have to remove the dogs from the kennels to be cleaned. And in the meantime, they have an off-site adoption event today. So all of these dogs from Dogs Adopts will be much better prepared to behave well and to be appealing for adopters and to have a great time at that off-site event. So thanks to all of these volunteers, we got all of the dogs out of adopts in one shot. And we have over 40 dogs out here. I think it's close to 50. So this is a great day. Indianapolis Animal Care and Control. Amazing staff and volunteers.
The gentleman that had worked there, I think he'd been cleaning kennels for about 20 years, and Dog Adopts had 90 kennels in it. It typically took him 3.5 to 6 hours, depending upon if it was full, to clean. 3.5 was his easiest load. And that day they had 50-something dogs in Dog Adopts. And the volunteers, no staff were involved in that. We came and some volunteers ran the dogs out for us. We wanted them to see what it felt like to have the dogs out of the kennels for cleaning. He walked out an hour and a half later and came out smoking a cigarette, looking at us like, what is going on here? He was so happy. Actually, he was a very routine gentleman, so he was a little disgruntled that his routine had been. But he did have to admit that, wow, I got a long cigarette break today. Okay, and who are the candidates for playgroups? Everybody, I'm sure you're probably already figuring it out from the videotapes, that all ages, breeds, and temperaments, right? As long as they're appropriate, not aggressive. It depends upon the dogs as individuals, but most importantly, the comfort level of the handler. This is an example.
Okay, it's January 6th, and I'm at Southampton Shelter with our interns from Safe Humane Chicago. Rachel is running the group at the moment, and she did the whole big full play group this morning, and then she left some of the big dogs in, and the behavior team over there, Kathy and Josh and Kevin just went in, brought a bunch of small dogs. So this is Abel, this big Pyrenees type dog. This is Abel's first day in playgroup. Abel came from Georgia. Usually they send the small dogs, but Abel got thrown in. How'd that happen? So he's been doing great. And where's Macho? Is that Macho? No. Where's Macho Man? There's Macho Man. Peeing on the cone. Macho is from ACCT Philly. He's been out of playgroups for a couple of weeks. I brought him up here in December. He loves playgroups. He's so good, but he got sick. He got canine influenza. So he's been out. This is his first day back. This little Pekingese thing, old dog, is really funny. It's backing off all the big dogs quite adequately. This is Shotzi. She's one of our long-timers. These guys are having a good time mixing the bigs and smalls. You get a lot of information.
But of course, Rachel did a good job fitting down the large dogs to the ones that she felt really confident about. There's Elmo, our Wheaton. Miss Randy here. Randy, this is the best dog in the house. She's the best girl. She's from Chicago. She does not do well with cats. She's got a strong play drive towards cats, but we have tested her with little dogs. It's very specific to cats. She's done great when she's been with little dogs. So the point of this is, I posted this video on Facebook for the interns so they could show themselves off of what a great job they'd done. That was their decision to mix that group of dogs. So we were going to do a small play group next, and they kept out the large dogs that had demonstrated to them that they had a lot of confidence in those dogs and their behavior. So what a great assessment too, right? You find out if any of these dogs feel differently about small dogs. But this video got some people really upset on Facebook. People were being very critical that we didn't understand how to identify dog aggression. And I kind of felt like saying, you want to see dog aggression? I've got video of dog aggression, and this is not it. That little exchange where the dogs started rushing around, the big dogs and the little dog, that was the thing that they thought was dangerous and an accident waiting to happen. But we didn't do anything. They diffused themselves, and they went off and played on their own. So what I like demonstrating there is, I'm sure that many of you are in the audience thinking, I can't believe you took that risk, right? And this is part of what we're talking about, is weighing risks and benefits, quality of life, 5 freedoms, and getting to all that as best as we can. And this is a big question. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty again here about what we teach these handlers to do, but one of the biggest obstacles is that we don't have the qualified people. This is all, what it takes for me to have a lead handler is they have to have confidence with dogs. They just have to be really comfortable with multiple dogs. They have to be flexible, open-minded, a team player, strong communication skills with people and animals, strong leadership qualities with people and animals. They have to be willing to boss everybody around because they're running the show here. They need to be spontaneous, not be very regimented in their routines, because you got to see what's happening in front of you and respond to that. You can't have this idea in your mind of how it's supposed to go. You have to look at what's happening. And you need to be willing to be wrong and to learn from your mistakes. And what do you think is missing from this? Experience and certification. I've had many of the shelters that we go to. This is Brian George from Barks. He was a kennel attendant there. I think his title has been changed to behavior manager. They developed a behavior program, which is their enrichment program, that revolves around their play groups. And Brian was the one that had the natural comfort with all of this, and he's the one that's now in charge of it all.
My name is Marcel. I work for the Animal Control, Palm Beach Gone. And that I'm learning the most with you guys is it's timing. Timing to act. The time to correct, to do some kind of intervention. Otherwise, beautifully, you see all the dogs running together. That's what the program is about. The program is to keep these animals together, happy and healthy. So thank you for watching.
What I love that is that Marcel he was an animal control officer, and they're still looking to try to shift him into being able to do this piece full time because he was so enthusiastic, and he was the one that we identified. This is the guy that should be running your play groups and your enrichment program for the dogs. He's the animal control officer. But I love his enthusiasm. So we're going to tell you some stories quickly of some shelters that we've had the privilege of working with. First of all, how it got started. Southampton shelter in 1999 was when that private party sent me down to the shelters to start training the dogs. It was a municipal shelter. But the lead ACO was really looking, he was progressive at that time. He wanted to move into this kind of new age of sheltering and get away from that feeling of being the pound. Their live release rate at that time was at about 74%. And that's where I identified, I got to let the dogs go run and play first if I'm going to get some training done for them, because this lady was paying me. I had to be able to demonstrate something. Experimented with comprehensive approaches to training there. I had a lot of experience with multiple species and all different kinds of venues. I'd started with marine mammals, had worked with equine, had done all kinds of stuff, and I was trying to pull from all of that experience to place it within this context of a shelter training program. Just like you guys have the specialized, I'm so excited about that you're going to have specialties in shelter medicine. I'd like to do the same for behavior. I'd like to have the specialty in the shelter behavior training program. So this is what I was kind of working out in my mind at the moment when I was there figuring it out, and we are now a privatized shelter. We've got an advanced behavior program. As you heard in that video, people are sending us cases from all over. And we have a 96% canine live release rate, and that's as an open admission shelter, wide open admission shelter. Like literally anything that comes through our doors under any circumstances, open admission. And and we take behavior cases. Then, after being at Southampton for a while, that same private party, she had her reasons, but she asked me, would you go out to Longmont, Colorado and work with the Longmont shelter? I'd like to donate you full-time to implement the program, do it again there. They had a higher intake, about 5,000 animals a year compared to the 1,000 at Southampton, a small shelter. Their live release rate, same thing, it was bizarre, right around 74%. They already had a strong volunteer program established that was really married to the behavior program, which I think had a lot to do with the level of success. This is a group of the volunteers that we were trained that worked with the dogs at the shelter. Phenomenal volunteer program. Moved into an upgraded facility in 2009, this beautiful building, $9 million upgrade. That had a lot to do with helping with the disease control, for sure. Many policies and protocols across the board at the shelter. It was a whole cultural shift for that shelter by implementing the behavior program, which really only was me showing up and rotating the dogs through play groups in the beginning. That's where it all started. The rate of euthanasia decreased in excess of 60%. In 2012, the private party that I worked for pulled me from Longmont and said, well, they're up and running, they don't need you anymore. And I'd started speaking and going to other shelters, so she said, she cut me loose. I go to Southampton once a month now to work with my team there, and the rest of my time is spent on the road working with other shelters. And they have a live, it's amazing that the numbers are identical, but 96% canine live release rate, same thing, accepting behavioral transfers. Then I went down to Barks, was one of the shelters that we worked with. March of 2011 was the first time. Staff and volunteers worked together to keep the playgroups going after we left. We were sent back in May and June of 2012, different grants that they had received. They really loved playgroups and they wanted to really keep progressing. It was a primary driving program for them at this point. They wanted to decrease their euthanasia, even though they're in the position of euthanizing for space daily. Their live release rate at that time was 62%. I'm not sure where they are now. Here's an example when I went back to see what they were up to. This is what they showed me.
Fifth, I don't know. Stephen here is a volunteer, and he's running the play group, and he just let Felix in. That's that tall, brindle, and white male. Felix has been doing better the last 2 days, but he was a little bit edgy. Woo! I'm so glad I had that.
So funny. That's Brian George in the background. He's their lead, that kennel attendant that became their lead playgroup trainer, and he was training all these volunteers, and his volunteer was running the playgroups because he's over there taking those phenomenal photographs. So I came back, and they were up and running and doing a great job. We just helped them progress even more. The change of focus to quality of life to inspire and maintain staff and volunteers emotionally. Barks is the first shelter that I went to where I really learned to speak about and frame the program. Like, I get stats from each shelter that I go to, see where they are and where they're trying to get to next. If they're still at a high kill rate, we really drive the program as a quality of life program. It will help them increase their life saving. But if you imagine that they start running the dogs in playgroup, they don't see the dogs as problematic anymore, but they have to kill them anyway. It's having to kill healthy and treatable animals is devastating to people. So to help them, because there's a painful part to getting past that, is that give the animals a better quality of life regardless. It's going to be painful for you, but it's better for the animals, and that is going to help you get to the next level. But that's how we help them cope with, there's nothing wrong with these dogs. How can I justify? And we're going to talk about that more later. We began tackling the conflict between medical and behavioral best practices. The medical teams were really struggling with the implementation of this program. And we established primary changes in their kennel routines to keep handlers and dogs safer. Staff and volunteer trainers worked collaboratively to start building a training process so that they had some certified handlers for within their program. You've put this many hours in, you've demonstrated the skill, we're certifying you as a playgroup handler. Staff reports better behavioral health of the dogs, better adoption matching, and rescue transfers. The rescue groups pull up their wagons now in the afternoon when the dogs are out in playgroup, and they pick the dogs out of playgroup. Most shelters, if you're transferring, or foster homes, or any other resources other than even adopters, if you have a socially healthy, or a social dog, it's got many more opportunities to get out. So it's great to demonstrate their abilities in playgroups. Okay, then we were sent down to Kansas City Pet Project. That was a nonprofit group that took over a municipal shelter in 2012 under terrible circumstances and conditions. I'm going to give you an example of this. This is pretty heartbreaking. I'll let you hear what it's like.
Rhea, this is for you. This is their kennel. And I want to show you their situation because they're going to be calling you for...
First of all, I don't think I've ever met a harder working group of people. I came in one morning when we were there with the training, and their director of operations was sleeping in 2 banks of kennels, you know, with her knees. She was on her stomach like this, with her knees up like against the back. She was sleeping like this because there's an animal that she needed to care for and keep an eye on over the night, and that's how she slept. This was actually, my understanding is the shelter was taken over under pretty terrible circumstances, and this group just said, we'll take it, because they just wanted to try to fix the problem, and then they got in there and went, uh-oh. And it was a really big problem. Have you done any shelter consults for Kansas City?
No.
No, okay. So this is, can you imagine safety issues for volunteers having to pull dogs off of a top kennel like that? So this is actually, I have to say, one of the hardest startups that we ever did. The dogs were so, that's the walk board. If they had gotten out every 3rd day, they were lucky from those kennels. So they were taken out of those kennels, tied to the wall or crated and put back in. So they were trying their best to be no-kill. They wanted to get to the highest level of life-saving, and these dogs were certainly under adverse conditions. So when we started putting them in together, there was a lot more aggression proportionally in this group of dogs. But knowing what I know, and because this group identified the benefits of playgroups, we persevered and pushed through, and they ended up they were euthanizing for space and quality of life. They weren't euthanizing for quality of life. Quality of life to them was the primary issue for the dogs in their care. We did the seminar for them in 2013. They created a full-time staff position as a result of the seminar, and they consider it a primary program in their life-saving efforts. I think they're above a 90% live release rate now. And do you think we have time for this video?
Yes.
Yes.
Getting out and being able to socialize with your own species is a really good thing for them.
A lot of times people think about food, water, and shelter, but we also want to provide for the mental and physical health of the animals, and Playgroups does both of those.
I've seen dog behavior change as a result of Playgroup.
Playgroups are an opportunity for the animals to get some enrichment time out of their cages.
We're one of the only shelters in the whole United States that does playgroups. We built 9 beautiful yards thanks to donations from the public and started doing playgroups as a way to socialize the dogs every day here at the shelter. We get every single available dog out into playgroups every day.
I introduce them together and put them together so that they can learn how to play. A lot of dogs come here who haven't been socialized, so they don't know how to interact that well with other dogs. And so I work with them so that hopefully they can get a home.
One thing that Playgroups enables us to do, and the knowledgeable staff enables us to do, is really see through that initial judgment and maybe see that it has so much more to offer, or it's infinitely more socialized than we thought, or it actually is very dog friendly and it would match great with the home. Well, our adoption rate automatically went up as soon as we started doing playgroups. So now having these yards, it's just been so wonderful. People can come and see the dog interacting with another dog, whether it be their own or another dog here at the shelter.
I think that they have accomplished bringing the stress level down of the dogs living inside the kennels.
These playgroups and play yards are helping us match these dogs into the best possible homes for them.
It's everybody working as a group to understand dog behavior first and foremost, and then what playgroups do and what training does for their stress levels here. And if we work as a group, then it's way easier for dogs to get adopted.
And this was a picture of the dogs that they sent right after we had left the seminar. And you remember what you saw when we were filming through the kennels, right? And this is what it looked like instead after they had done their playgroups on their own without us there. So picture says 1,000 words, right? Okay, then we had the privilege of bouncing down to Mississippi to Southern Pines Animal Shelter, and you've worked with Southern Pines as well, correct?
We visited, yes.
Okay, so this was an open admission shelter, and they changed hands. Like one group had it, and again, I'm sure you've all seen this. I don't know what exactly precipitated this, but a whole new group came in to take it over. Their live release rate when they took it over was only at about 20%, right in there. Primary issue, euthanizing for space and disease management.
And they did have recurrent problems with canine distemper at the time that was contributing to the low live release rate and focus on disease.
So our focus was quality of life. This was another one of those shelters where be brave. In fact, while we were there, the dogs that we identified as our playgroup rock stars, on the last day, they needed to make space, and the staff was in another level of distress because all of these dogs that they now saw very differently, many of them were potentially on the euthanasia list, and there was some tears. My assistant and I were trying to, be brave because from our shelters, there's no way any of those dogs would be euthanasia candidates, but again, understanding the context of where we were, helping them get to their next level of life-saving, and it turned out they couldn't take it. They could not stand the idea, and they just ended up doubling up dogs and rearranging, and they would not have had the ability to do that prior. So none of those dogs ended up euthanized, and they all ended up adopted. When we left, the staff would make overall operational changes to accommodate these daily play groups. They report better behavioral understanding and assessments. And I got to tell you, there was an actual story where there's a litter of dogs that came in. They were a little scruffy looking, what we would consider highly appealing and adoptable dogs just by their look. But they were feral, and I guess they were very young, and one of the dogs was receiving its intake vaccination and yelped and screamed. And its litter mate panicked at that point and would not let anybody touch him. So he was slated for euthanasia the next day. They literally sedated him, the pre-sedation for euthanasia, and the director of operations went back and just said, you know what, let him wake up. I can't stand it. I've seen all these dogs out in playgroup do better. Let's just let him go to playgroup and just see if that makes a difference. And he was adopted 2 days later. So talking about saving a life, that was, off the table, saved his life. And here's a story about Corinth.
So on Monday, when we started playgroup program, this dog was really highly aggravated. We had a hard time finding him a kennel mate because he was literally a ping pong ball in his kennel. Would mount every dog that he came in contact with. There's no way I would have ever squatted down next to this dog. He would have just been all over me. Now with playgroups, he is walking on loose leash. He is very docile. He's very, very nice, sweet, very adoptable dog, whereas this dog was going to probably make our euthanasia list. He's probably been here the longest out of any dog at about a month, and has already been pulled from a euthanasia list twice, and was going to probably make that list this week. And now we have so much more information on him. He was just really frustrated, really, really frustrated dog. And now he seems to be quite satisfied. So we're really proud of Corinth.
He was one of the primary helper dogs, so he met every dog in the place because he was so social, and it clearly made a difference for him. Apparently this group, this doesn't have anything to do with our program. By the time we'd gotten there, remember when they said that they took it over, they were at a 20%, they were up to 70% on their live release rate. And I don't know if I'm allowed to, their budget, am I allowed to say what their budget was? I think it's 6,000 animals a year, $600,000 budget. Nobody's responding like I think.
No, it's not. It's definitely not a well-resourced shelter. And the buildings are those modular sort of warehouse style buildings. And it's amazing. Before the playgroups were started, the dogs were getting sick, mostly from distemper. And there was a lot of euthanasia going around to try to manage the shelter out of the distemper crises. And after playgroups, it's amazing that the disease rate has actually plummeted concurrently with the increasing live release rate. So this was a shelter, had $600,000 a year, 6,000 animals walked through the door, and instituted playgroups with just that little resource, and changed the whole quality of life for the dogs, for the staff. The outcome was just absolutely fantastic and achievable by other shelters in the same situation.
That's one shelter. You know, you have different experiences when you go to other shelters, and it's really eye-opening to get out of your own environment and have the experience that other people are having trying to care for the animals, because we know that we have these common goals. We know that we all want to get the same thing accomplished, but the picture of how we get there is really very different from shelter to shelter. What I can share with you is that the animals are all the same. The animals are never the problem. The problems are people, protocols, policies, entrenched thinking, lack of resources. The lack of resources, I think, Southern Pines is a shelter that I had. That was a very moving experience when I went there. They're all moving, but some of them really stand out to me. It's a shelter that I really want to keep an eye on, because they do exemplify that lack of resources really is no excuse when we're talking about quality of life and trying to achieve a better outcome for the animals. All right, thank you. We get to do more after a little bit of a break. Thank you.